Chris, everything seems to be up and running. Thank you, Rushi. And hello to everybody, but over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. My name's Chris. I'm one of the equity consultants at Vested. So today we'll be delving through a bit of a guide to growth shares. So as Matt said, please do drop any questions in. We'll pause a few times, but we'll definitely make sure we get everything answered. So what we're going to do today, excuse the photo of me. What we're going to do today is we're going to look at what growth shares are, how they're used, what's the benefits, and how to set them up. So pretty key things. So if we start, we'll sort of have a look at really what growth shares are. So growth shares are a special class of shares, but they've got limited rights. So a share can have 3 rights: right to vote, right to capital distribution, and right to dividend. So growth shares have limited rights to capital distribution. So a growth share is a real share, but it's issued at a hurdle. So let's say, for example, we value the business at £1 million. You would issue the growth share above that value. So the only share above that £1 million, which has got the added benefit that the current shareholders would not dilute. So in most cases, growth shares have full rights to dividend once they become unconditional. It's up to you whether or not they have the voting rights. Now, you don't just give growth shares away because you just don't give equity away. So you would give them with conditions. That could be time-based, it could be KPI. You can pay dividends to growth shares while they are still conditional, but it can't be an expected right to dividend because the whole thing about growth shares are they're issued above the current value of the company. And if you expect dividends all the time, then there will be value in them. So what are the benefits of growth shares? Just tax-efficient way to reward employees and non-employees. So there's no eligibility criteria around growth shares. You don't have to be an employee. You can give them to anyone. You can give them to contractors, advisors, employees, people outside the UK, people inside the UK. There is no eligibility criteria around it. So they're very popular if you don't qualify for EMI, perhaps non-exec directors. Or if you've reached the EMI limit, then you want to get that key member of staff in, you would sort of look at growth shares instead. As I mentioned, it protects the existing shareholders from dilution. So the existing shareholders have built the business to this point. So that is all of theirs. They do not dilute in that. As growth shares say, you only share in the growth of the business. So as I mentioned, you issue the growth shares above the existing value of the business plus what we call a hurdle, because the growth shares have to be issued in a worthless state. So typically the hurdle is between 20 and 40%. That's to ensure that they're worthless, because the fundamental of equity is you cannot give someone something of value without there being a tax consequence. So if we value a business at £1 million and you give me 10%, thank you very much. Day one, I get a bit of paper that says I own 10% of the business. Day two, I get a £45,000 tax bill from HMRC because you've just given me £100,000 worth of value. So growth shares are issued in a worthless state. They're issued above the value of the company so that when you get them, there's no tax to pay. And it reflects the recipient adding value to the business. They share in the growth. So no income tax implications of growth shares are worthless at the time of issue. Now, if you sell the shares later, as long as it's not back to the business, you'll only pay capital gains tax on the difference between the hurdle and the eventual sale price, so 20%. So much better than an income tax of up to 45%. So just quickly, if we value the business at £1 million and you issue me with growth shares at 1.2 million and then you sell the business for £2 million, I pay 20% capital gains tax on my percentage of that £800,000. So here we go. Growth shares are always issued at zero value. So if we look at this example, it says moving his menu bar so that you can see. Stephanie and Ted have built this business up to £1 million. So we'll say it's worth £1 million. There's 1 million shares. It's £1 a share. Nice and easy for my maths. So, but they want Jim to come in and work. So the business is worth £1 a share. Stephanie and Ted have built it to that £1 million, £1 a share. So they brought Jim in. However, they don't want to share in that £1 million. They've built it. So Jim comes in at a hurdle of 20%. So Jim shares everything above £1.20. So Stephanie and Ted have everything below £1.20 a share or £1.2 million. But Jim helps the business grow. So you can see here, Jim's helped the business grow. So the business is now worth £10 a share. So Stephanie and Ted have everything below £1.20. Jim only shares between £1.20 and £10. So he's done a great job because the business has grown. So he shares in that growth. And because he's done such a good job, values. Sarah's joined the business now. Now the business is worth £10. So Sarah joins again at a 20% hurdle. So she's sharing above £12. So Stephanie and Ted are only diluting in the growth of the business. They retain everything below £1.20. And then Stephanie, Ted and Jim retain everything below £12. Sarah only shares above £12. So you're only diluting in the growth of the business. So dilution is not a bad thing. Would you rather have, in this case, 100% of that £1 million that Stephanie and Ted have? Or 100% of that £1.20, then 90% between £1.20 and £10, and then 80% between £12 and £20. So as the business grows, it's incentivizing those employees, those not just employees, those people who they're giving growth shares to help the business to grow. So growth shares, you can't offset against your corporation tax, but quick example here. Issued at £1, the hurdle price is £1.20, sell the business for £10. That's an £8.80 gain, 20% capital gains tax. They walk away with £7.04 per share. If we say that they were given the shares valued at £1, they're going to pay up to 45p on the pound for each share. So it's a much more tax efficient way to do it. So growth shares are becoming incredibly popular. So growth share plans have increased nearly 100%. You know, about 15% of all vested customers use growth share. So we've got 2,000 organizations currently on the platform. So if we pause there and see if there's any questions.
A couple of questions already in, Chris. First one is, how do you value the shares? So, you know, particularly, I suppose there's a couple of angles to that, you know, how the vested value the shares, but also I suppose if we compare that to other schemes that are in place like EMI and unapproved options, perhaps. So, you know, we have a specialist valuations department. All they do is valuations on shares. Now we do share scheme valuations. So we're typically looking for the lowest tax point. Now, when you're doing growth shares, the valuation is not going to be as low as the EMI because you can discount an EMI valuation for several factors. In fact, a growth share valuation is going to be much, much more conservative because you have to ensure that you're issuing it in a worthless state. So we get the valuation, we follow HMRC best practice. We get that valuation, we add the 20 to 40% hurdle so that we ensure that it's issued in a worthless state. But yeah, you know, we'll look at the last 3 years consolidated accounts, dividend information, investment information to get that valuation. Great. Thanks. And then what's the next one? If we issue growth shares, can we issue more later for existing new employees? I suppose that's in your tree example there that you've had. Yeah. So there would be a different hurdle rate because you'd have to do the different valuation. So, but you can issue as many as you want. So, you know, I could be the founder and Matt shares above £1, Rishi shares above £2, and then, you know, we just keep adding different people, you know, as long as they're issued in a worthless state. They say you're only diluting in the growth. So it's not a bad thing. It's not a risk because if the company doesn't grow, the growth shares aren't worth anything. I've got a couple of questions that I'll combine, Chris, because I think they're related. So I think in one explanation really is probably the way to go. So we've got somebody that asked, can I set the hurdle higher if we wanted? And somebody else, so can you set it anywhere that you want? So you mentioned 20% within the presentation. And someone else has asked, is there anything to stop the growth shares giving entitlement to all capital? So I suppose that's somebody setting, below that hurdle rate.
So if we start with that one, if you set the value below the hurdle, it's a tax implication. You cannot give someone something of value without there being a tax implication. So it's an immediate tax implication because you're gifting equity, even if they're conditioned. So if you wouldn't bother setting up a growth share if you're going to let them share in the full value of the company, you just give them a share. But they'll pay their marginal rate of tax, so up to 45% on that. Yeah. With regards to the upper limit, no, you can set it wherever you want. So I recently had an organisation who they're worth currently £4 million. They plan in the next 5 years to sell for £20 million. So the two founders had a discussion. We worked through a few scenarios. They want to share above £10 million. So that's a hurdle of much higher than that 20%. But they have set the hurdle so that the first £10 million is always theirs. They share above that.
Right.
So, we worked it through. I then presented to their staff. And we worked through the example, and the staff were fully aware. It had been communicated that the plan is to sell in 5 years at £20 a share. And we sat down and I took them through the calculator and said, the four of you sitting there, if you help this business sell at £20 million, you will share £2 million between the four of you. There were some very motivated, very happy staff.
Yeah, excellent. Good. Okay, there's questions keep coming through, which is great. We've just had a question come in that says, could you issue a second wave of growth shares if the valuation had dropped since the first one? Would the permission of the first recipients have to be gained?
So that sort of helps with this. So you issue growth shares with conditions. Now, growth shares are a separate share class. Do you want them to have the right to vote? Now, if the valuation had dropped and you're going to issue a second wave of growth shares, are you cancelling the first issuance and reissuing everything? I'm pretty sure everyone would say yes to that, even if they have the right to vote. But the whole thing about this is the reason people do share schemes: to recruit, to retain, to reward. So it's got to be incentivizing. So for me, if I'm sitting here with my growth shares and this other person comes in who's worked for the company for 3 months, whereas I've been there for 5 years, and they're getting more of a reward than me, is that incentivizing? Mathematically, yes, you can do it. That's absolutely no problem at all. Psychologically, is it the best idea?
Yeah, I suppose you also look at it to say, okay, they were set up for that person to help the business grow, and if they've not helped the business grow and it's gone down in valuation, then there's an argument both ways for it. So it can technically be done, and without that person's permission, unless they're a shareholder that needs a vote, I suppose. Yeah. Okay, there's a couple more coming through. So the first one was, if this is issued to a non-UK national living outside the UK, do you still report the gain to HMRC to claim the tax through a tax back through a tax treaty? So it's a very tax specific question there.
A huge part of that's going to depend where they are, what the tax law is where they are. So yeah, that would be something that you'd need to speak to a tax expert about. I can't comment on a random country. Some places have a better capital gains rate. Some places have a worse capital gains rate. Some places have different rules. So for example, if it's in America, you have to do a valuation for fair market value, which is an additional valuation on top of the valuation you would do in the UK. So unfortunately, it's not something like that. It's very, very specific, and it would depend on the specific country. And the answer would be speak to a tax advisor in that jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's good advice. Somebody's just sent a question in just around the cost. They work with a number of of startups and the cost of setting that this up. I think that's probably one that we could, as we get to the end, Chris, maybe we show specifically how this works on vested and some of that. We could talk through the pricing as a whole. So I'll come back to that one perhaps later on. So we'll park that one. What happens if the holder of growth shares leaves or is dismissed for some reason?
So that helps with this section. So we're going to talk about conditionality. That you wouldn't just give equity. So if you gave me 10% of your company and I left the next day, I still own 10% of your company, unless your shareholders agreement is very specific. But essentially, that's why you give them with conditions. So growth shares with a hurdle can be issued with conditions attached. So what's the vesting criteria? It's a way of protecting both the business and the recipient. So you can set whatever conditions you want. Conditions should be specific, tangible, and measurable, so they cannot be challenged. Matt will pop a link to the sort of common KPIs that we see into the chat. But essentially, it could be time, it could be company value, it could be a specific project. It could be, Chris, we'll give you 10,000 growth shares above £1 if you bring in £1 million worth of business in the next 12 months. If you bring in between 750 grand and £1 million, you get 7,500. If you bring in between 500,000 and 750,000, you get 5,000. If you bring in less than 5,000, you get nothing. So growth shares are issued up front. So I would be given the full 10,000 shares today, conditionally. And then after the sort of qualifying period, after the 12 months in this example, if I'd only brought in 800 grand, 2,500 of my growth shares would be deferred and cancelled, and I would be left with 7,500. However, because I'd met the conditions, those 7,500 would no longer be conditional, they would be unconditional. So I would have rights to dividend at that point. So it's about thinking about the different conditions that you have. So it could be part of the team, be an employee for 5 years, work 4 days a week, work 1 week a month. For an advisor, you will give me 1 day a week of your time for the next 3 years. After that, you get X. I just said bring in £1 million worth of new business. Deliver an agreed project. Matt, you can have 10,000 growth shares if we have an all singing, all dancing e-commerce website built in the next 12 months. Or if the business sells for £5 million, you get 10,000 growth shares. Business sells for £20 million, you can have 20,000 growth shares. Business sells for 30 million, you have 30,000 growth shares, so on and so forth. Or it could be for influencers. If you refer 100 users to the platform over the next year, I'll give you 5,000 growth shares above this value. So, you can build all sorts of different conditions in there. Now, you have to have a clause in your articles of association to allow you to issue and use growth shares. The way that we do it, either we would give you the clause and you would pay your solicitors to insert it into your articles of association, or what's pretty common is if you have model articles, you simply adopt our articles of association free of charge. It has the correct clauses in. So if HMRC believes the shares were undervalued, the recipient would be liable to pay income tax on the difference. So when we do the valuation, we follow HMRC best practice. We then add the hurdle. Now we're doing 85 HMRC approved valuations a month. So we're pretty well versed with what they will accept. And as I say, a growth share valuation, we are pretty conservative with, because we need to ensure that they're issued in a worthless state. So are there any more questions?
Yeah, so just to recap on that one then, with the question was around if somebody leaves or is dismissed, so it's dependent on where they are. So if they have conditionality still against them, then they could be, those shares would be deferred and cancelled. If they have met the conditions, then they are a real shareholder in there, and I suppose then they're bound by their articles of association. Yeah,
it's down to the shareholders agreement. So if they are conditional, it depends what conditions you put on as well.
Yeah.
Is one of the conditions they have to remain an employee? Yes. So if they leave before the shares become unconditional, they lose everything. If you've met the condition that, right, you get these growth shares and the only condition is when the company sells above a certain value, you get a percentage. If you've not put the condition in that they lose if they leave, then, they get to keep them. So, it's fairly standard. You would build in a good leaver and bad leaver clause.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now it says, are growth shares mainly so the person can be rewarded when you sell the business, or is it also for yearly dividends?
So you can pay dividends to growth shares when they are conditional. However, it cannot be expected. You don't really want to pay dividends when they're conditional, because the whole point is giving a growth share in a worthless state. If we agree with HMRC that this is what the growth share is worth, and then you give them dividends every 3 months for the next 4 years, HMRC are going to think that's not worthless. There's tax, and there should be a tax on that. And they would be right, because there is an expectation and there is value in that. Now, it's a bit of a mix and match. If you have no plan to exit, but you want to share equity with your employees or with contractors or advisors, and growth shares are a good way for them to become a shareholder. Once they have met the conditions, the criteria, then they are then a shareholder with rights to dividend. So it's a way that you can pay dividends. You don't have to. It would be a separate class of share. So if you pay yourself dividends, they would have the right to dividend. Or if you have a plan to exit the business, then yes, it's a way to share that equity. You don't have to pay the dividends if you don't pay yourself dividends, or you would make the condition these shares only become unconditional upon an exit, which means that they only really benefit upon an exit. So yes, both. Sorry, that doesn't massively help, but every organization is different. What's your goal? Is your goal to get to exit? Yeah, then yes, growth shares are great because they can be conditional until the exit occurs. But you look at the strengths of the scheme. You would only really use growth shares if you don't qualify for EMI. So they're outside the UK, you've already hit your EMI, because EMI is more tax efficient. And if they're only going to benefit upon an exit, you would look at an exit-based EMI scheme. But if they do not qualify for an EMI, then growth shares is the most tax-efficient way to do it. Yeah. Or they're not an employee, or you're in a disqualifying trade, so you're not allowed to do EMI. So, and some organisations, from a philosophical standpoint, decide that, perhaps for a senior leadership team, growth shares are better. We've just brought this guy in, this person is going to drive the growth of the business over the next 5 years before we sell. So we've given him growth shares because he said he's going to come in and deliver this. But if he does not deliver this, just get him.
Yeah. Well, I think there's another question that's come in. I think there's two parts to it really, Chris, and I think probably the second part would go back to your other answer of you probably need to speak to a tax advisor. But with regards to the shares themselves, the growth shares, what happens to the shares if the person moves country during the vesting?
Nothing, because it's not a country specific. EMI, you would, but growth shares are not. There's no eligibility. So if they became an employee, if they were an advisor and became an employee, it doesn't change anything, or they move countries. Growth shares you can issue to anyone, anywhere. Yeah.
Well, just to probably worth us going back to that question earlier, where they said that, let me bring it back up again, but it was really around, Chris, if you're able to sort of just walk through the pricing. They were looking to put something in place for one person. How does that work through vested? Be interesting. Ours is obviously on a sliding scale of numbers, so just to walk people through it briefly would be good.
So the important thing is there value in the business? So we offer growth shares in two different ways. So we've got something called launch. Now, launch is for zero value startups. Lunch is £50 a month, but you get your growth shares and everything included. However, if you're not a zero value startup, then you have to have a valuation. So, that obviously brings the cost up. Now, Vested is everything's under one roof. It's a one-stop shop for the design, the execution, and the ongoing management of all share schemes and equity management. So we've got two-way integration with Companies House. So all of your Companies House work will be done. So, for launch, you get all your Companies House work. If you take on investment, you can issue shares as well as issuing growth shares. If you are an established business, not zero value, then it's a case of how many people you're looking to give it to. If you're only looking to give it to under 10, then we need to create the share class. So the Vested platform mimics your corporate governance. So to do anything with regards to equity, you have to follow the Companies Act of 2006. As a digital platform, we do it digitally. So, let's say you want to issue growth shares, you need to create the share class. Then you need to do a share authorization so that you can issue the shares. So to do any of that, it's a written board resolution with 100% approval, and then a written shareholder resolution with 75% approval. I click 2 buttons in real time, an email goes to the board. Do you pass this written board resolution to create this new share class? Everyone says yes, automatically passes, automatically sends out the written shareholder resolution. Do you pass this written shareholder resolution to create a new share class? As soon as 75% of the votes say yes, it automatically passes. Companies House is automatically updated. You now have a new share class. You follow the same procedure to do the share authorization. Then on the platform, you issue the shares with the conditions. It's all very simple. It's all in one place. The whole point of Vested is to make this available for as many people as possible, because it can be, from a pricing standpoint, it can be quite difficult for UK SMEs to do this via the traditional means, because you've got to speak to lawyers, you've got to speak to accountants, the price just comes up. Everything's included with Vested. If you have a look on the website, the costings are there. So you've got light, launch, standard, guided. So if you are zero value startup, you would do this on what? If you are not a zero value startup, you'd probably do it on guided, so that you get the full share scheme design support.
Brilliant.
There'll be links coming up. What I would say is book in a call. It'll be myself or my colleagues. We can go through your case on an individual level, and we can sort of explore conditions. We can look at all the different things with you. There's no cost. There's no, it doesn't commit you to anything. So it's just a free consultation.
Well, I'll just pop that up on the screen, Chris, now, so people can book in with you. I'll put the link in there so that people can book directly in. I'll leave that there for a little while. There was a couple of other questions. One might be one of those questions actually might be worth exploring in one-to-one, but I'll put it to you, Chris, and we can sort of just sort of explore it. But essentially, they were asking if growth shares could work for a family investment company, really. So mum and dad have various properties in a limited company, and they want, kids, grandkids to share in the future growth of those properties. Could that work as well? As I said, that might be one. If it's a limited company, you put growth shares in at a certain value, it could work above that, but it might be one we'd like to explore one-to-one. I don't know your thoughts on that.
It's probably worth exploring one-to-one, but essentially, yes, you would just create new growth share classes, and you could. But what are the conditions?
Yeah,
that's the question. What are the conditions? Because if you're just giving shares for the purpose of giving dividends, you might struggle to get HMRC to agree that something's worthless. So what's we're going to create this growth share class. They're going to share above £10 a share. However, when they're 18, which is in 8 years. The whole, as I said earlier, the fundamental around it is you cannot give someone something without there being a tax implication.
Great. So we probably answer this a different way around, but somebody's asked about international startups and scale-ups. So is it what's the most popular to issue to the UK team from an international startup? Is it growth shares or unapproved options? I suppose from our point of view, we probably flip that question the other way around, wouldn't we, really? But
yeah, I mean, what's best for the individual? You don't need to give everyone the same thing. Some people could have growth shares, some people can have EMI. If we use vested as an example, we're an international company. So we're a UK SME, however, we have people outside of the UK. So those of us who qualify for EMI have EMI because it's the most tax efficient thing for us as well as for the company. But those people who do not qualify for EMI have either unapproved options or growth shares. You know, what's best for each individual? And let's say you can mix and match. You can make the conditions the same. So, you know, if you could give someone options, you could make the conditions of you only benefit upon an exit. And then if you give someone growth shares, the condition is these only become unconditional upon an exit. So it's the same condition, just different tax treatment.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is the company's mindset when they're putting this together as well, isn't it? So lots will say, I'm going to put together EMI for the UK employees because they qualify for it. And I want to just put in place something that is structured in exactly the same way. So I want an unapproved option scheme for anybody internationally. Because it's structured in the same way, it feels fair, but they will just pay the tax that's in their jurisdiction, and the same would be sort of vice versa, really. Growth shares, they consider, you know, some of that is that mindset as well of issuing real shares as opposed to options when you are issuing options to other employees as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, growth shareholders will appear on the cap table, even when they're conditional, because they're real shares. If they leave and they lose all their growth shares, then they will then disappear off the cap table, but they will appear on the cap table at your next confirmation statement.
Yeah. Somebody's asked, we have an existing business valuation. Oh, sorry, it's just skipped up as I started to read it. We have an existing business valuation formula for existing shareholders annually. Can we use that valuation?
Well, and just add the hurdle on? Yes, but it would be at your own risk. Yeah, it's what the HMR, you know, do HMRC agree with your valuation, essentially?
Yeah, and the vested valuations team they'd take that into account, but they would talk to you about, you know, where they saw the risk of that valuation and how that would compare to theirs as well, wouldn't it? Yeah. Right. So somebody has just asked a question, so let me just read it out to you here, Chris. So apologies if it's already been discussed. So okay, here we go. On the question of EIS status for existing shares, are there any concerns in the waterfall other than ensuring that growth shares have the same rights to dividends and capital on a winding up? There should be no risks to EIS from a typical waterfall provisions for growth shares.
So essentially, around EIS and SIS, one of the core rules is you cannot have preferential shares. Growth shares are not preferential. We issue growth shares to companies that go on to do EIS and SIS all the time, as long as you don't make one of the rights preferential. So, you know, when we're designing the new share class for you, as long as you don't put a preferential right in there, then you would qualify for SIS and EIS. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, launch for zero value startup. So you could incorporate on the platform. So if you've not incorporated, you incorporate on the platform, we sort out your cap table, we do the share issuances, and then you could issue conditional growth shares right then, and then look at getting SEIS and EIS. So it's just, you know, it doesn't affect your eligibility, your advance assurance, anything like that, as long as there's no preferential rights.
Yeah, I think it's important as well, the point you made earlier, Chris, around the either adopting vested articles of association or the relevant clauses within them, which are very much related to this as well. Yeah. Okay. There is I think there's just comments around that, and and it's one that we've seen really before, that Abingdon Health Limited. So happy to pick up with David around that. as well. So very aware of that case. And that's something that we happily pick up with you in the conversation, just to show how growth shares work in relation to EIS. It's probably a much longer conversation, I would say. I think any other questions coming in, please keep them going. We're happy to have a little bit more time on this, because it's definitely a topic that generates interest and plenty of conversation. So yeah, back over to you, Chris, just for the final element, perhaps.
Yeah, no problem. So Vested, as I mentioned, we are the UK's first regulated digital share scheme and equity management platform. We are an FCA accredited business. That's just about trying to make it as simple as possible for you. So everything's in one place. All your company's house, all the reporting, everything is managed there. So, when you do things the old way, you speak to accountants and lawyers, the setup fees, any ad hoc fees, you have to do all your submissions yourself, the paperwork, spreadsheet hell. I speak to a lot of people who talk to me about spreadsheet hell, whereas everything, if you do it through Vested, it's just all in one place. So the company, you as the editor would have everything, the cap table, all the company's house submissions, all the growth shares or options that you've issued, all in one place. All the reporting is there. And it's just all done through that. It's tax efficient, it's easier to do, and it's managed on the platform. So when you have to, so let's say you're doing EMI, platform will generate the initial notification, then the annual notifications for you and send you it. So you don't have to sort of work through any of that. It's just a way to manage everything in a simplistic way. We encourage people to come and have a chat and book a free consultation. Just coming and having a chat with us. This is all we do. We only deal with equity. We don't do anything else. We are very much subject matter experts. So, we won't offer commercial advice because we're not a law firm. We will fully explain what all of the different decisions mean. But essentially, every company is different, so you need to decide how you want to do it. Growth shares are a fantastic tool, but it's not one size fits all. So, I encourage you to have a chat with us and, what the best fit for your organization. Is it EMI? Is it unapproved options? Is it growth shares? Is it a mix of all three? We often see organizations having a mix of all three. So, I look forward to speaking to you all soon.
Yeah, great. And I think, the point that you've made there, just to trying to help simplify things. And for any of, I'm sure there's a couple, just looking at sort of some of the names on there, accountants on here, your business owner, and lots of times they will invite the accountant on as an editor. And actually it's actually the accountant that does this work through the platform. So certainly encourage people, because to have a chat with one of the team, how it could work for you and any businesses that you're related to. So no new questions coming through, Chris. I'll leave it there for a couple of seconds, but yeah, I think that covers the topic. We'd encourage you to join us again for any of the future webinars. So we will be sending out further information. I think, Chris, you'll be the person following up on this one.
Yeah, so I'll send over a recording of the webinar tomorrow, if you've missed any of it, or if you have anyone else that needs help with insomnia and want to go through it. We also generate an incredible amount of information. So, we've got an SEIS, EIS playbook, for example, or you can look at the guide to growth shares, or we've got, guides to EMI, guides to unapproved options, absolutely everything. So we encourage you to have a look on the website and have a flick through the library. We've got a series of webinars, which should be up there as well. The next one, I believe, is how to design a great conditional equity agreement. So that should be coming up in about 4 weeks. And then we'll probably start the cycle again. So I think that'll be 7 or 8 webinars we've done now, and we'll go back and we'll start the fundamentals of equity again, and then work through EMI, growth shares, and how to use equity to recruit and retain. So there's a lot of information that we do produce, so we try and help.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Hope it was helpful. Please do, if you've got further follow-up questions, follow up using those links, book a call in with one of the equity consultants. We'd be more than happy to help you all out. And I hope you found it informative. Thanks again, everybody.